Okay, so here we come to the remediation technology and techniques. There is a separate model number 4 on remediation technology and techniques, specially devoted to soil and groundwater. And of course, there is an overlap with the guidance of the Basel Convention, and reference is made to the Basel Convention in this model. The content of this part of the training is first the table of content of Model 5, then I will introduce Model 5, and I will discuss some remediation techniques, process flow diagrams of exceeded thermal treatment, the same for soil washing, and then I will discuss the principles of phytoremediation, and I give an example of the land farming. And this presentation is the information presented is used in phase 3 of the sustainable management contaminated site, and phase 3 is the remediation assessment, the selection of the best remedial option. The table of content of model number 5. After the introduction, there's a chapter on pop waste and pop contaminated matrices, definitions and destruction levels, and pre-treatment are discussed. Then remediation techniques for soil and solids are given. Excavate and treat, bioremediation, phytoremediation, and soil reagents are discussed. Then section number 4, technology and techniques for POPs management and destruction at contaminated sites, non-combustion versus combustion, and then more details about non-combustion technology. A separate section is devoted to combustion technology, and then examples are given of treatment trains. A treatment train is actually different components of an installation to treat various chemicals of concern on a contaminated site. It's not seldom that there are more than one contaminant on site and that you need to have treatment trains. Treatment trains, for instance, for groundwater is first a sedimentation unit, then an air stripper to get the contaminants which are volatile in the air to volatilization, and then a pump getting this air, which leads to a filter, active carbon or organic matter filter. So that's a treatment train, so different components to clean the water. Section 6 of Model 5 is remediation techniques for groundwater contaminated POPs, introduction, containment, permeable reactive barriers are discussed, pump and treat, and denattal contamination. Then a separate section is devoted to the remediation of PFAS in groundwater. This is a new POP and is completely different in the behavior than the other POPs, because PFAS is being water soluble, the other POPs are non-water soluble or less water soluble, meaning that PFAS, which is a forever chemical, has the same characteristics as a POP, so they are persistent, they are difficult to break down, but they are water soluble, so they form large plumes in the groundwater. And this is a very hot topic currently in the Netherlands and in Europe, because PFAS and PFOAs are used for many articles, including articles, sample materials in environmental purposes. So that is a complicating factor. And PFAS have the same characteristics, so they are bioaccumulative, they migrate easily in the food chain, but they are also water soluble, which is a factor which makes it very complicated and expensive to be remediated. This model ends with an extensive list of references for groundwater remediation and reference for solid and soil remediation. Okay, introduction to remediation technology and techniques. Model 5 provides guidance on available technology and techniques for the management and remediation of POP contaminated site, sediments, groundwater, and POPs. The difference between technology and techniques is the way or the method, and technology is the instrument. You want to evaporate your volatile components from the groundwater. That's the technique you want. And the method is you use an air stripper. So the air stripper is technology and the volatilization is the technique. Guidance. Okay, then I will continue. Okay. Guidance on sustainability issue associated with technologies is also included to address circumstances where some technology may generate emissions, releases, or residues containing Annex C POPs. And these are Annex C POPs are the unintentional POPs, the dioxin and furans. Yeah, so the guidance, the model also goes into more details on the technology that may produce unintentionally POPs, and that should be taken care of. An entire section is dedicated to PFAS, I told you, contaminated site management and available remediation techniques. This is a rapidly evolving area with many challenges due to the persistence of POPs, PFAS, and difficulties in destroying them due to their resistance to thermal degradation. So besides that they are water soluble and form large plumes, they are also resistant to thermal degradation. So a lot of techniques cannot be applied for the remediation of POPs, PFAS. Some technologies and techniques covered here in this Model 5 are focused on the degrading and removal of POPs contaminants in the environmental matrices to reduce the risk to receptors and to acceptable levels. So not cleaning, but reduce the risk to acceptable levels. Other technologies have been assessed as capable of destroying irreversibly, transforming POPs waste so that it no exhibit POPs characteristics. So that's the difference. We discussed technology that reduce the levels, and we discussed technology that completely remove or destruct. In some cases, multiple technologies and techniques are required to first extract and then destroy POP contaminants. Examples of these combinations or treatment trains are provided as they increase the efficiency and sustainability of remediation and avoid mass disposal of soil sediments. So meaning that if you have a contaminated soil, with POPs pesticides and it contains rubble or stones or gravel, then the pre-treatment is to take out the stones and gravel when they are clean, or even when they are contaminated, you can take out the stones and gravel and treat them differently on site, and then only transport to a treatment facility the contaminated soil, all to reduce the contaminant mass to be treated. Another example is if you have detected that the contaminant is on the clay minerals or on the soil particles smaller than 63 mu, as I just showed you slides earlier, then you can separate these different soil textures on site by, for instance, hydrocyclone, and then you get the stream of the clean part of the soil and the contaminated part of the soil. The clean part is in this case then the fraction which is larger than 63 mu, and the contaminated part is the fraction which is smaller than 63 mu. And of course the volume of the soil to be treated is then less, but because you concentrate the contaminated part of the soil, but then the concentration is of course higher. Okay, we discuss now the site component of the contaminated soil and groundwater. And we have two groups of techniques: ex situ treatment technology and operational in situ technology. Ex situ is removing the soil, excavating, thermal treatment, combustion or heat, washing, and land farming. And land farming is biological. Thermal, nearly all soils can be treated thermal. Soil washing, this contaminated soil, to be cleaned by soil washing, should be preferably coarse textured, sandy soil. That is easy to use this technique of washing. Clay, which is heavy textured, is difficult to be cleaned by washing. Land farming, of course, land farming can only be used if you have organic components. Organic components can be biological degraded. Heavy metal soil, contaminated soil, cannot be treated by land farming. And land farming soil preferably should be coarse textured soil. That's easy to manage. Heavy textured soil is very difficult to clean with land farming. And then we have ex situ immobilization, which is not on this picture above, preferably coarse texture soil. Immobilization is, for instance, used in many tar lagoons in Europe, and then it's mixed. It's taken out, it's mixed with cement bentonite with a certain formula, and then it's put into a landfill. So you have a monolith which is stabilized, immobilized. Then we come to the operational in situ technology, physically, evaporation, biologically, biodegradation in situ, only organics, and then chemically, chemical oxidation. You introduce chemicals into your soil to enhance a certain chemical process to break down your contaminants. In situ, all in situ techniques work only with coarse textured soil. It should be preferably coarse textured soil. Heavy coarse textured soil are difficult to be treated with an in situ technology. Again, biological, only degradable organic compounds could be treated. Physical and chemical in situ technology are difficult to control because you inject soil or you inject chemicals and it's difficult to predict what it does. And then we have the last one, in situ immobilization. And also here you inject substances, clay bentonite, for instance, and then it becomes solid and it becomes hard. And this is only also preferably with coarse textured soil because the material you inject should go everywhere. So this is in a nutshell what we have in our toolbox to remediate soil and groundwater.
Mr. Goodwin, before you continue, Omar is asking, in washing technique, what kind of liquid we can use here?
For washing?
Yes.
Soil washing is mostly done just by water. And in some cases, some additives are being introduced, but then we come to the chemical part. But soil washing is preferably, and on the soil washing is also what I said, to use an hydrocyclone. So you separate the contaminant part and the non-contaminant part. But to use soil washing and demands that your soil fraction where the contaminant is, and that you have to pilot it always. So you cannot just do it, you have to pilot. But I will come to that later. A lot of techniques before you do a large scale implementation should be piloted before. Bench scale testing, field testing, pilot testing, and then be implemented on a large scale. Yes? This is a flow diagram of an ex situ thermal treatment. So you ex situ, so means you take it out, you take the soil, you excavate the soil. You feed your contaminant soil into your thermal treatment plant. You introduce heat. You get evaporation, pyrolysis of the contaminants. Then the treated soil is taken out. And then again, heat and air for incineration of the contaminants. Then you get fuel gas treatment. You have your residue and your treated gas. So the output, this is the input. Sorry. This is the input. The output is treated soil. And this should be monitored. So at regular intervals, you have to sample this soil to see if it's clean. Then you have your residue. Your residue can contain contaminants, so it should be checked. And often this is contaminated and should be treated accordingly. And then you have your treated gas. And the treated gas should also be monitored to make sure that you have no formation of UPOPs, the UPOPs from Annex C from the Stockholm Convention. Now, this is an example of a project we had in Vietnam, and the contaminated soil was being co-processed in a cement kiln. And I'm not a specialist on that, but here is the feed. So don't ask me questions. Here it's being preheated. It enters above the kiln. The feed of the contaminant material is somewhere here also. That's why if you are bringing soil or waste to be co-processed in a cement kiln, you always have to repack it in small quantities because it has to fit into this feed of the cement kiln. So here it goes into the kiln goes from it turning around, and the process it goes, the heat is going this, and here is the clinker, the cement, and then of course all the off-gas treatment. And then you see that this, I hope you see my cursor, is all for off-gas treatment. This is the feed and this is the process. So off-gas treatment is the majority of the technology, and all to prevent that this gas is cleaned and not containing UPOP, so dioxin. Now here are some pictures of the project. Excavation soil. They ask us to bring it in big bags. It's not in bulk, but we had to repack all the soil in big bags. We sample the soil here to give them a good idea of what was the concentration. Then we obtain backfills, clean backfill soils. The big bags with contaminated soil were stored before transportation, then they were loaded, and then the soil, the excavation was backfilled with clean soil. The soil was brought to the cement kiln, and here it was officially handed over, so they became the owner of the soil. It was pre-treated, first over a sieve, then it was bowl milled to make a slurry. A bowl mill is a mill with iron balls, and they hit the content of the mill, so breaking down the large particles into small particles to be able to make a slurry. And the slurry was stored in tanks, and then it was brought to the incinerator. And here is waste being also in portions fed to the kiln. These cement kilns should have license. Before you use a cement kiln for co-processing contaminated soil, you need to do a test burning, and in many countries you need to confirm with the regulation on emission. And because you cannot just feed the kiln with large quantities, the facility should have storage capacity to store contaminated soil, and it will take, or this took them at least more than half a year to get rid of to process this contaminated soil. Now we come to the process of washing. Again, washing is ex situ. You excavate contaminated soil. It's pre-treated, so sieved, take out the large portions. And then it's classification, so you know where the contaminants are, and most likely they are on the residue of the soil smaller than 63 mu, and this should be treated or landfilled, and then dewatering. So here are the two fractions, most likely clean. This one is contaminated, this one is clean, but you have to prove this by analysis. So you take a large bulk sample, you separate the fractions, and then you analyze the separate fractions, and then you establish where the contaminant is, and then based on the results of the fraction analysis, you make your classification and you divide it in the different fractions. And then you have your contaminant fractions and your clean fractions. Then we come to the principles of phytoremediation. Phytoremediation is enhancing biodegradation in the soil because of the activation of the biological life in the soil. Phytoremediation also is uptaking and degrade the contaminants in the plant. And another, which is also possible, is uptake and emissions and ultraviolet degradation, so by the sunlight. That's very specific. We did that for certain contaminants on a chemical factory. Phytocontainment, you have your phytoremediation, so the breakdown of the contaminants, but phytocontainment is also that the contaminant is not being degraded but held on the site, controlled. It's hydrological containment, erosion control, and uptake in storage. Hydrological containment means that the plant is asking for water, and so the contaminated water is being abstracted. So the groundwater flow is being reduced, and that's hydrological containment. By planting, let's say, many plants that demand a lot of water, and that the roots reaches the water table, gives you this hydrological containment. This is in Holland used. I do not think in your country it will be visible. But erosion control, yes. Vegetation controls erosion, so runoff is being stopped, so the migration of contaminant material is being reduced. And then uptake and storage, yes. Roots can take up the contaminants, and it can be stored in the roots or in the tissues. Therefore, it's important that phytoremediation should be done with local species, not bearing edible fruit or leaves, and the timber cannot be used for constructions unless it's tested. Now, I promise you to give you an example of land farming, and this was a pilot project before large-scale implementation. This was a project in China. The application was Darament, and this process was, or the project was consisting of 5 cycles of each 7 to 10 days. We applied Darament, we irrigate, we measured the parameters, then we had the anaerobic cycle by covering the soil, tillage to have the aerobic cycle. And why? Crops break down under anaerobic conditions, so oxygen is limited, and then the breakdown products of these POPs were, let's say, in an oxide environment, breakdown due to biodegradation. We took composite soil samples and we observed fungus on the surface and inside. This soil was heavy textured, and that was the limitation for the effectiveness of the bioremediation. But here you see the construction of the depot. It was a pilot test to see if we could have this on a large scale. Irrigation, we watered everything, the soil, then we covered it, so in an anoxic environment, so the POPs are now breaking down. Then the soil was tilled, and see the people doing this work have masks, boots, Tyveks, and so on. So health and safety aspects are important. Then it was for a few days open to allow oxygen to enter and to break down the breakdown products of the POPs. And you see already that the whitish stuff is appearing, which is the fungus, and this is a close-up of a soil fragment, and on the surface of the soil fragment you see this fungus growing, and they assist or they enhance the biodegradation of the POPs. But as this is heavy textured, the inside of this structure element of the soil was not affected. Any questions on this pilot? We did this pilot before full-scale implementation, and the conclusion was this is not a feasible technique for large-scale implementation because the texture was a limited factor of this soil. And here you see we broke open one of these elements and no fungus are growing. On the outside it does, but on the inside it does not. Okay, this was in a nutshell the content of the model discussing the remediation technology and techniques, and this picture is of a treatment train. Any questions?